Ever feel like society's rules were written ages ago and like maybe it's time for a refresh?
Yeah.
Well, get ready to dive into Robert Nozick's Anarchy, State, and Utopia, where he does exactly that. Forget tweaking around the edges. Nozick starts from scratch.
Starts from scratch. Wow.
Asking what a just society would look like if individual rights were the ultimate bottom line.
You got it. You got it.
Yeah.
Nozick, he wasn't afraid to, shake things up. He challenges us to imagine a world where even well-intentioned governments could be stepping over the line,
Right.
infringing on our individual liberties in the process.
So no more safety nets, no more like public programs.
Right.
That's a pretty radical stance, isn't it?
It is radical, yeah. Nozick argues for what he calls the minimal state, a government that exists solely to protect basic rights, enforce contracts, and maintain order. Anything beyond that, in his view, risks violating the very freedoms it's meant to uphold.
Hold on. So let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this.
Okay, sure.
He's saying even programs designed to help people, like universal health care or education, are off the table.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where his entitlement theory comes into play.
Yeah.
Nozick believes that to judge the fairness of a society, you can't just look at the end result.
Okay.
Who has what right now? Instead, you have to trace those possessions back to their origin, like a philosophical detective.
Okay. I'm intrigued. So how does this whole detective work? How far back are we talking?
All the way back.
Oh, wow.
Was something acquired through a fair trade,
Yeah.
a gift, or inheritance. Then, according to Nozick, you're entitled to it. Full stop.
Okay.
But if the government takes from someone who acquired their wealth fairly, even to help those less fortunate,
Right.
Nozick argues that crosses a line. In fact, he compares it to theft.
Whoa there. Comparing taxes to theft.
Yeah.
That's sure to ruffle some feathers.
Yeah, you think?
I can already imagine the think pieces. Tell me more about his reasoning on that one. It seems like a pretty bold claim.
It's bold, yeah. But it gets to the core of Nozick's philosophy.
Yeah.
He argues that if the government takes your earnings without your explicit consent, even to fund something like, public schools, it's infringing on your right to what you've rightfully earned.
So it's not necessarily about the program themselves, but the principle of the government taking something that doesn't, in his view, belong to them?
You've got it.
Yeah.
It all circles back to individual rights as the most fundamental principle in a just society.
Okay.
Even if that means potentially sacrificing some societal good in the process.
Okay, so we're talking about a radical reimagining of the social contract here, but it also raises a ton of questions.
Sure.
For example, how does Nozick reconcile this with the very real need for social safety nets?
Right.
What happens to those who might not be able to thrive in a system with minimal intervention? And how on earth does he envision this minimal state actually coming into being? It's not like we could just snap our fingers and make it happen.
Yeah. You're right. You're right. These are just a few of the many complexities and, let's face it, controversies that Nozick's work brings to the surface. But that's what makes it so fascinating, isn't it? Anarchy, State, and Utopia isn't about providing easy answers. It's about pushing us to confront our assumptions and consider possibilities that might feel counterintuitive, even unsettling at times.
It's like he's holding up a mirror to our ideas about fairness, responsibility, and the very purpose of a society.
Precisely, precisely. And in that mirror, we might not always like what we see. But isn't that where real growth happens?
Yeah.
When we dare to question what we thought we knew and explore ideas that challenge our preconceived notions.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're just getting started. You won't believe what Nozick has to say about how this minimal state could actually emerge and his vision of utopia. Let's just say it's not your typical picture of a perfect world. So we left off with this idea of a minimal state emerging organically, but how on earth does that happen? It's not exactly something you can just pull out of a hat.
You're right. It does sound a bit like magic,
Yeah.
But Nozick actually draws on a familiar concept from economics, Adam Smith's invisible hand.
The invisible hand, the idea that individuals acting in their own self-interest can somehow create a beneficial outcome for everyone.
Exactly. Nozick suggests a similar principle could be at play in the formation of a minimal state. Imagine individuals, starting from a state of anarchy, realizing they need some way to protect their rights and resolve disputes.
Right.
They They form agreements, create protective associations, and over time, these individual actions could, in theory, give rise to a system of governance that resembles a minimal state.
Okay, I'm following you so far, but it does feel like a bit of a leap, doesn't it? Assuming everyone will just naturally gravitate towards this minimal state. What about power imbalances or folks who just don't play by the rules?
Yeah, those are valid points, and
Um,
Nozick does acknowledge, potential challenges to his theory.
mhm.
Critics point out that things like power struggles, coercion, the potential for exploitation could disrupt this utopian vision of a spontaneously self-organizing society. It's one thing to have a compelling theory, right?
Right.
But translating that into a workable reality is a whole other ballgame.
It definitely raises a lot of questions. For example, even if we entertain the idea of this minimal state, can we really rely solely on private charity to take care of those in need, as Nozick suggests?
Right.
It seems like a risky proposition at best.
That's one of the most common criticisms leveled at Nozick's minimal state.
Right.
Critics argue that relying solely on, voluntary generosity creates a precarious safety net, leaving the most vulnerable members of society potentially stranded.
Right.
They argue that a just society requires a more robust system of social support.
And where does Nozick stand on that? Does he offer any counter-arguments to that critique?
He does address it, but not in a way that satisfies everyone. While he acknowledges the importance of helping those less fortunate, he maintains that it should be a matter of individual choice, not government mandate.
Okay.
He believes that forcing individuals to contribute to social programs through taxation, even for a good cause, infringes upon their rights.
So it all circles back to his fundamental belief in individual liberty as the paramount principle.
Exactly. For Nozick, protecting individual rights is the non-negotiable starting point.
Right.
And any system, even one designed with the best of intentions, must be carefully examined to ensure it doesn't infringe upon those fundamental freedoms.
It's a challenging perspective, to say the least.
Yeah.
It forces us to confront some uncomfortable trade-offs between individual liberty and the collective good. But I think what's so valuable about engaging with Nozick's ideas is that it pushes us beyond our comfort zones,
Yeah,
urging us to really examine the values and principles we hold dear.
I completely agree. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, Nozick's work forces us to think critically about what truly matters in a just and equitable society.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, we can't forget Nozick's fascinating, and some might say unorthodox, vision of utopia. It doesn't exactly paint a picture of a one-size-fits-all perfect world, does he?
Not at all. Remember, for Nozick, it all comes back to individual choice. His concept of utopia isn't a single static ideal, but rather what he calls a framework for utopias.
A framework for utopias. Tell me more about that. It sounds intriguing.
Imagine a world where instead of striving for one perfect society, we embrace a diversity of communities, each with its own unique set of rules, values, and ways of life.
So instead of trying to fit everyone into the same mold, it's about creating a space where different visions of a good life can coexist.
Precisely. Think of it like a buffet of utopias. Individuals are free to choose the community that best aligns with their own values and preferences. If a particular community doesn't feel like a good fit, they're free to leave and find one that better suits their needs.
It's a fascinating concept. It reminds me of that old saying, one man's trash is another man's treasure. What might seem restrictive or unappealing to one person could be another person's idea of paradise. But how would such a system actually function in the real world? Wouldn't it lead to chaos and conflict?
Those are valid concerns, and Nozick himself grappled with the potential challenges of his utopian framework. He acknowledged the need for some overarching principles to guide interactions between these diverse communities, especially when it comes to resolving disputes, protecting individual rights, and ensuring basic fairness.
So it's not like he envisioned a world where anything goes, with no rules or boundaries whatsoever.
Not quite. While he championed individual liberty, he also recognized the importance of a stable and predictable framework within which individuals could exercise their freedoms. It's about finding that delicate balance between autonomy and order, a theme that permeates much of his work.
It's a fascinating tightrope walk, isn't it? Trying to create a system that maximizes individual choice and freedom without devolving into chaos and conflict. But that's the beauty of exploring these philosophical concepts. It challenges us to think differently about the world and grapple with these complex questions.
Absolutely. And while Nozick's vision of a framework for utopias might seem idealistic, it does offer a compelling alternative to the traditional top-down approaches to societal organization. It prompts us to consider the value of diversity, experimentation, and individual choice in shaping our collective future.
It's like he's flipping the script on how we think about utopias, you know?
Yeah.
We're so used to thinking about these perfect societies, like picture-perfect harmony. But Nozick, he's like, nope, let's embrace the chaos, the messiness.
He's all about that individual choice.
Exactly, even if it means things aren't always perfectly aligned.
Yeah, he understood that trying to force everyone into the same mold,
Right.
even in the name of creating a utopia, can stifle individual expression. It can stifle creativity.
Right.
His framework for utopias, it's really a celebration of that human diversity.
Yeah.
And the freedom to live according to one's own values.
It's radical, but it's also incredibly liberating when you think about it, right?
Totally.
To imagine a world where instead of saying, this is the right way to live, we're creating a space for, you know, a multitude of possibilities, a marketplace of ideas.
Yes.
Of lifestyles.
Exactly.
It's so different from these utopian visions that we see so often.
It is.
Of a single, perfectly ordered society.
Right.
It's just a different way of thinking about it.
And it speaks to Nozick's deep respect for individual autonomy, I think.
Oh, absolutely.
He believed that true freedom meant not only having the right to choose,
Right.
but having a meaningful array of options to choose from.
So it's not even just about having the freedom to choose. You have to have good choices.
Yes.
That means something.
Yeah. They need to be substantial. They need to be diverse.
Right.
They need to reflect that wide range of human values, human aspirations.
So you're creating a world where different versions of the good life
Yes.
can all exist.
Can all exist, exactly.
Side by side. And that actually brings us to something else I wanted to ask you about, which is Nozick's view on the free market.
Okay, yeah.
Because he's often associated with libertarianism, a hands-off approach. But even he seemed to recognize that completely unfettered, you know, free markets could have some downsides.
Yeah, he certainly doesn't shy away from acknowledging that there could be some pitfalls.
So where does he draw the line? When does he say, okay, maybe we need a little bit of intervention here?
Well, one area where he saw a need for maybe some level of regulation or intervention was in the case of monopolies.
Monopolies, right. Because if one company gets too big,
Too much power.
Yeah. It strangles everything else.
Exactly. And Nozick recognized that for a market to truly be free,
Right.
to function effectively, there needs to be a level playing field.
It's got to be fair.
It's got to be fair, where new businesses
Have a chance.
have a genuine opportunity, to enter that market and compete.
Yeah.
He understood that monopolies could undermine the very principles that they're founded upon.
So even though he might not have been advocating for, like, huge government regulation,
Right.
he also wasn't blind to the fact that, like, markets can fail.
They can fail.
And you might need some safeguards in place to make sure things are fair.
Exactly. You need those safeguards to prevent those abuses of power.
Nozick, full of surprises.
He is full of nuance. Yeah. And he doesn't fit neatly into any of those ideological boxes,
Right.
He's always challenging us to think critically, question our assumptions, consider those multiple viewpoints, always.
Always. He's always prodding us to think a little bit deeper,
Yeah.
Don't just take things at face value. Look beyond those surface-level arguments and really, truly grapple with the nuances of these issues.
And that's what makes engaging with his work so rewarding.
Right.
Even if you don't always agree with his conclusions.
Right.
He forces us to confront those uncomfortable questions, wrestle with those competing values. And ultimately, I think you walk away with a more sophisticated understanding of these issues.
Well, this has been quite a journey.
It has.
Anarchy, state, and utopia. We've covered so much ground.
They have.
We talked about minimal states. We talked about the entitlement theory, utopian frameworks, the limits of free markets. And it's clear that Nozick's ideas, they're still relevant, right?
They are.
They're still sparking debate.
There's still sparking debate.
Even decades later.
And I think that's a testament to the power of his work.
Right.
He wasn't afraid to ask those big questions, the uncomfortable questions.
Yeah.
And in doing so, he forces us, all of us, to really ask ourselves what matters.
Right.
About justice, about freedom,
Yeah.
about the kind of society we want to live in.
And on that note, I think that's a perfect place to wrap up our deep dive
I agree. Oh,
into the thought-provoking world of Robert Nozick. He might not have all the answers,
yeah.
but he sure gives us a lot to think about. So thank you for joining us on this journey. And until next time, keep those minds open and those questions coming.